Star blessings, beloveds. I wanted to come back and talk about Saturn in Pisces again, because there are many things that I did not have the opportunity to communicate yesterday with Ari Moshi Wolf, as I wanted to give him the opportunity to express his wisdom and his perspective. So here I am, ready to talk about some things that I now would like to share. There's a lot of different ways of understanding Saturn in Pisces, and it depends on what lens you are looking through. We can look at Pisces through the esoteric lens, the evolutionary lens, the exoteric traditional Hellenistic view. There are many different ways, and I don't want to complicate things, but I would like to add what I consider to be some important reflections that could be useful when you hear them. So I've just been sitting here this morning, just reading a few things and gathering my thoughts and reflections and feeling into this. So I think that a good place to start actually would be to, first of all, address Pisces. What is Pisces? How does this archetype speak to our experience as souls and human beings? There are many things we could say for Pisces, but I think the first place I want to start is, first of all, it's important to understand that it encapsulates the entirety of everything. It's a composite of every other sign. Everything else that we see in the chart, all the houses, signs, etc., are all contained within the 12th house Pisces Neptune. So the other matter that connects to that as well is that the 12th house is a place where we could say the unconscious components of our being are also contained within that realm. So a good definition for the unconscious is, I like this actually. So how the unconscious mind works. When conceptualizing the unconscious mind, it can be helpful to compare the mind to an iceberg. You've probably heard the iceberg metaphor before. It's been used in the realm of psychology for decades. It's been used in Jeffrey's work as well. Jeffrey Wolf Green, he often makes reference to the iceberg relative to the unconscious and Pluto. So everything above the water represents the conscious mind. So let me just read that. Everything above the water represents the conscious awareness, while everything below the water represents the unconscious. So if you look at an iceberg and you are looking at that from the surface level, which is really the only place you can look at it from when you're standing at a distance, that iceberg is connected to the entire ocean. And so that metaphor, the entire ocean, is a reflection of our own unconscious. So you can imagine how much exists and is contained within us from that unconscious perspective, right? So that iceberg represents that conscious part of our mind that operates on a day-to-day basis. It's very, very small when you think about the ocean itself. So then it says here, consider how an iceberg would look if you could see it in its entirety, which is the ocean, right? Only a small part of the iceberg is actually visible above water. What you cannot see from the surface is the enormous amount of ice that makes up the bulk of the iceberg, submerged deep below in the water. The things that represent our conscious awareness are simply the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the information that is outside of conscious awareness lies below the surface. While this information might not be accessible consciously, it still exerts and influence over our behavior. And in the world of psychology, it is understood that the majority of our behavior is driven from the unconscious components within us, which is Pluto. Pluto is our unconscious desires. The other thing that I was thinking about as well is that Pluto is the esoteric ruler of Pisces. At the moment, Pluto and Saturn that have just recently ingressed into these new signs, Saturn into Pisces, Pluto into Aquarius. In traditional astrology, there is no aspect between these signs. There is an aspect called semi-sextile, and in evolutionary astrology, that is considered to be important, and I'll make a couple of comments about that. But from a traditional point of view, there is no aspect between them. There is something happening, though, because what we need to consider is relative to Saturn and Pluto, and this is sort of bigger picture level material, but it is important, very important actually. Given these two planets have ingressed into new signs, remember they formed a new phase conjunction back in 2019 into 2020. And I did a video for that, back then, a few years ago, and I spoke about the intensity, the volume of intensity and difficulty of that planetary combination, because it is one of the most difficult planetary combinations, but it is also the planetary combination that will give us that strength and potential to work through what appears to be the most impossible in our life circumstances. It's the hardest work we'll ever do when it comes to Saturn-Pluto work, the hardest, deepest work we will ever do. So fast forward from 2019 to the present, Saturn and Pluto have moved apart, and because they have both changed into new signs, they now form this semi-sextile. And that will then proceed to Saturn and Pluto forming a sextile aspect, sextile aspect, which will be when Saturn ingresses into Aries. That'll be a semi-sextile. And that will be in 2026. And then in 2029, when Saturn has ingressed into Taurus, that's going to be a very profound time collectively and individually, because that will be the first quarter square between Saturn and Pluto relative to the new phase conjunction that started in 2019. So there is this germinating process and unfoldment of those two archetypes, where they began, and where we are today with that. That is part of the mix of what's happening with Saturn in Pisces for us, and Pluto in Aquarius, which I will address Pluto in Aquarius down the track. I intend to come back with Ari and speak about it with Ari, but I will also be speaking about it on my own as well. So getting back to Pisces, again, Pisces is the entirety of everything. It represents the unconscious field, which is largely unknown to us at that conscious everyday level. I just want to read some key words that correspond to Pisces, and there's a lot of words. We could really write an endless list, but here are some key words. The mystic, mysticism, medium, alcoholism, the martyr, the savior, illusions, delusions, disillusionment, psychic, astral glamour, addiction, escape, feeling helpless or hopeless, weak boundaries, surrender, the subconscious, transcendence, the suffering innocence, lost identity. That's going to be a big one, because I'm going to read something to you in a minute from one of my favorite books. The masochist, fantasy, being naive, disbelief, disassociation, confusion, the dreamer, isolation, drugs, guilt, individual guilt and collective guilt. Musicians, artistry, music, the muse, the inspired one through the arts. So Pisces is a feminine sign, a yin feminine sign, a water sign, and Saturn is a diurnal planet. So I'm mixing a bit of esoteric, traditional, modern astro, right? I'm mixing a few concepts here because I think they're all valid and important to try to integrate without creating confusion, which is very easy to do with Pisces. There can be a lot of confusion. In any case, Saturn, once again, it's a diurnal planet, and it works well in the diurnal hemisphere, right? Because it corresponds to time-space reality, to this physical experience. So for that reason alone, Saturn in Pisces is out of sect, as we would say in traditional astrology, because Pisces is a feminine yin sign, which is the opposite to diurnal, right? Nocturnal, diurnal. So it is said, you know, in traditional astrology that Saturn out of sect, which it is in the sense of it being in a feminine nocturnal sign, would have some challenges, would have some problems, for sure. So there's that in the mix as well. Now, Pisces is, and I've done a video on this, I did this a few years ago. I did a video called, well, I've forgotten what it's called, actually. I might try and find it and put a link below, because some of you might be interested in watching it if you haven't seen it. It's basically an encapsulation of what we call the ego. And if you think about the zodiac wheel, the 12 zodiac signs, in short, what we are seeing is the entirety of a particular life incarnation, right? In terms of the natural order of the zodiac. So Aries is the birth. And after birth, when a baby is born, it starts to develop and form, right? It develops a little personality, its own mind, etc., etc. Now, that process of that unfoldment and that development, which begins a process of an egocentric structure, which is the personality, has a very distinct and specific process throughout the entire zodiac. And so when we get to Virgo, for example, from Aries to Virgo, which is a quincunx or an inconjunct, Aries to Virgo forms that aspect, which requires adjustment, right? So relative to the ego, what I've suggested is that when we get to Virgo, it is ego denial. And think about that, because what comes before Virgo is Leo. Leo is the full, manifested, full, complete expression of the personality or the ego. So when we get to Virgo, we have to get off our high horse and start to tweak and correct some things, because when we were in the fifth dimension or fifth house, fifth sign, Leo, we've fully formed and self-actualized. Now, when we get to Virgo, we've got to start looking at, okay, well, what could I improve on relative to myself, right? How could I improve on this? How could I improve on that? What needs some rectification? What skills can I further develop? So there's a sense of ego denial there. We can't, sixth house Virgo is not about the ego or the personality. It's about looking at what are the things that we can work on to improve ourselves. There's no place for the ego there, hence ego denial. And when we get to Scorpio, it is the process of ego death. It plunges very deep into those deep waters of Scorpio, and it experiences a death rebirth experience, the personality. I'm fast forwarding it, right? Then when we get to Pisces, so it's those three signs, distinctly those three signs. When we get to Pisces, I've termed it ego surrender, okay? Because Pisces is about surrender, 12th house surrender, Neptune surrender. So when we get to that 12th house Pisces Neptune domain, it is about surrendering the ego. Surrendering to what? Surrendering to the oneness, the unity, the source, divine source creation to all things. Reconnecting with source, understanding that we are not separate from source. We are source expressing itself. But when we were born, as it were, Aries, right through the zodiac, we had to take on an egocentric structure, personality, to express through, right? And have the experiences that we do for the purposes of our own evolution. So by the time we reach Pisces, it's time to let go of that identity and remember where you come from. Remember, you are the unison of all things. You are not just this separate identity. It is important to take that journey of developing and creating a separate sense of identity in order to have the experiences that we have, but to not lose sight within that journey of identifying so much with that personality, that ego, that egocentric structure, that you believe that that is all you are. And so thus, when we get to Pisces, that is the ultimate lesson and recognition and remembering. So given Saturn is a diurnal planet that has to do with time, space, reality, the conscious structure of our life, we can sort of see the inherent dilemma with Saturn in Pisces. Saturn wants to maintain control, terrified of anything that is not within its control, as it were. And Pisces is asking us to relinquish that control. So there's an inherent dilemma there. If we are coming purely from that egocentric personality level, there will be challenges with Saturn in Pisces. There's no two ways about it, which is why I wanted to come back today and address some of these further themes. And so I'd like to read something to you guys, and just bear with me because it's a couple of pages and I don't want to read it too fast because I want people to hear it and understand it. So therefore, if you can just allow me a couple of minutes to do that. And so many people will ask, which book am I reading from? So it's called The 12 Houses by Howard Susportas. Now, I've had this book for 25 years. It's a fantastic book. And whether you're a beginner or not, it's a fantastic book. But if you are a beginner, you know, I highly recommend this book. There it is there if you want to see what it looks like. It's Howard Susportas was an amazing astrologer, very insightful. Okay, now he's referencing Saturn in the 12th house here. However, a lot of the themes that he will speak to are important for Saturn in Pisces. There's connections there. We can't deny that Saturn in Pisces will have these similar themes. So he says, like those with Saturn in the 8th house, people with Saturn in the 12th house. And so just where he specifically says Saturn in the 12th house, just imagine Saturn in Pisces, okay? Although there is a distinction between a sign in a house and, a planet in a house and a planet in a sign. There is a distinction, okay? But just as a general overview and theme, if you can just appreciate the connection of Saturn in the 12th with Saturn in Pisces. Like those with Saturn in the 8th house, people with Saturn in the 12th are often afraid of what lurks beneath the surface level of consciousness. That is a powerful encapsulation of Saturn in Pisces. Because really, when you think about that sentence, it really references what I read before about the unconscious mind, which is 80% of our behavior, our instincts, our drives, desires, probably more than 80% comes from this place. And so he says Saturn is afraid of what lurks beneath the surface, right? Saturn is a diurnal planet speaking to time, space, reality. In Pisces, it's the ocean. It's the ocean. It's the entirety of everything. Remember Saturn in mythology, Kronos swallowed all his children for fear of being overtaken by them. That's a metaphor, a psychological metaphor that evokes within all of us matters that we fear in our life relative to the placement of Saturn in our own birth chart. We all have these deep intrinsic psychological fears when it comes to Saturn. Should they relax their controls over themselves, they fear that they might be engulfed by overwhelming emotions. So I've seen this with people who have Saturn in Pisces. There's always this level of control and conservative, cautious nature about letting too much out, being seen, a very strong sort of subconscious motivation to want to keep everything in control. And there are many ways that can be expressed and manifested depending on the soul, the individual, their chart, and so forth. But a simple example, and I know somebody who is like this, who has Saturn in Pisces, it shows up for this individual in the form of constantly wanting to control everything in their home by cleaning everything all the time, putting everything away, keeping everything completely organized, just not being able to relax. You know, even when you go to visit this person for a coffee or a dinner or something, you know, this person will sit for a little while, but then they'll get up and they'll have to straighten something up, put something away. You know, it's that ability to, it's the inability to just relax and let go. And so the external expression of that, of tidying and cleaning and constantly fixing things, is a way of keeping that sense of control over everything. It's just a reflection of that inner emotional landscape that is so deep, so complex, has so many layers. And if I just relax, what am I gonna? It's like the floods are going to come through, and it's going to erupt, and it's going to cause chaos in my life. I wouldn't know how to respond to that. I wouldn't know how to handle that. It'd just be too much. So what I do is I'm just in this constant movement, doing things, fixing things, putting things away, cleaning things, you know, just so that I don't sit still. And maybe if I sit still for too long and just sort of relax, something might come through that I just couldn't possibly handle. That's kind of like the subconscious or unconscious psychology, you could say, right? With this Saturn in Pisces. It's a bit cold here today. That's why I'm wearing my wintry kind of coat. Okay, so let's just read a little bit more. He says that the Neo-Freudians believe that in the name of security and social adaptability, we repress certain drives, impulses, and appetites which others or our own egos in brackets, would find unacceptable. That's another important point. That just comes back to that whole control thing. Fear of my own ocean of emotions, and will that be understood, received, or accepted by others? There's an inherent fear there. In divorcing themselves from what is the unconscious, they also inhibit a very positive and pressing desire which exists in all of us, the urge to reconnect to our at oneness with the rest of life, which is Pisces, Neptune, 12th house, oneness, unity, the entirety of everything. Instead of experiencing joy at the prospect of merging with something greater than the self, they recoil in horror at the thought of dissolution of their individuality, which is another theme that's going to come up with Saturn in Pisces for all of us. Saturn is the structure we create, the form, the boundaries, the definitions. Saturn is definitions. In Pisces, there is no form, there are no boundaries, there are no definitions. It's a sense of losing our own individuality, individual personality, and the sense of melting or dissolving into this cosmic soup of oneness. But if I do that, if I let go to such an extent to submerge with the oneness, the field of oneness, then how do I define who I am and my life and my circumstances and my story? It's not a conscious, I think what's important to understand here, this is not a conscious thought. We don't wake up thinking about this necessarily, but this is what is emerging from the ocean within when Saturn is in Pisces. Where was I? Robert Dissol, a French psychotherapist, coined a term for this, calling it repression of the sublime. In certain cases, they suffer a type of guilt or despair. Something inside tells them that they are not all they could be. Or they are beset by paranoia, a feeling that someone or something is out to destroy them. Traditional textbooks interpret Saturn in the 12th as undoing by secret enemies. So the 12th house, traditionally speaking, is the house of self-undoing, right? But then on the other hand, it is also said that Saturn rejoices in the 12th house. So, you know, there are a few different signatures, meanings, or perspectives, and they're all valid within their own right. Sometimes Saturn in the 12th, I think the reason it rejoices there is because it's so kind of, it's hidden, you know, it's buried away, it's hidden, so it can't bring that harsh, limiting, restricting, difficult, cold nature about it. In the 12th, it's hidden away, but you know, it's doing things, as it were, stirring up, evoking the unconscious material. So it's not doing nothing, it's doing big things, but at that surface everyday level, it's like out of sight, out of mind. Where am I? Okay. He says, yeah, traditional textbooks interpret Saturn in the 12th as undoing by secret enemies. He says, but more often than not, the enemy is an aspect of our own unconscious. Angry with them for having been brushed aside. Okay, sorry, let me just reread that. But more often than not, the enemy is an aspect of their own unconscious selves. our own unconscious selves. And so there's a sense of anger of those components that have been suppressed or brushed aside, is what he's saying. When they make friends, so he's saying for us, when we make friends with those parts of ourselves that we have denied, then they protect themselves against invasion by double locking the doors, keeping to themselves and remembering to forget their dreams. Deep psychological fears, which are difficult to trace, may contribute to a pervading sense of self-doubt and lack of confidence. Sometimes their problems may stem from prenatal difficulties. Anyway, I won't read this section because it just goes into this whole description, because this section I'm reading from, it's really in reference to somebody born with Saturn in the 12th house, but we are using it as a reference point to take away what I consider some important themes about Saturn in Pisces. So he goes on to talk about Saturn in the 12th relative to the birth, the mother, and some issues around that, right? I just won't read that for today. Some with Saturn in the house are terrified of intimacy, he says. This could stem from a fear of being engulfed or dread of losing their identity as a separate individual. Once again, that comes back to that point of Saturn in Pisces. It's if we think about the 12th house as being ego surrender, we are surrendering our identity, our egocentric structure, as it were, in order to merge back with the divine. And so by attempting to even do that, there's this sense of losing control over who I am and what defines me. And he's saying here that this can speak to personal relationships as well, because very authentic, deep, real intimacy would require us to, to let go of all the walls that we've built around our heart and ourself that acts as a way of protection for us, right? It's, intimacy is about being vulnerable, being seen, being open, being transparent, and allowing the other in so close to you that you virtually merge as one, as it were. But from the personality ego perspective, that's terrifying because there's a sense of losing control. Control being Saturn, of course. He says they may believe that they can only maintain their authority by withdrawing from people, or they fear that no matter what they do, all things will come to a bad end. Thus, they shun attachment or commitment to people or things. This underlying sense of futility needs to be brought to the surface and explored. Until they do this, they make fear the whole realm of emotions and feelings, 12th house, and take refuge by living mainly in their heads. So there's a sense of needing to control the experience of emotions, the range of emotions, for fear of not being in control in a relationship, and feeling that vulnerability that often people have a hard time with being vulnerable. It depends on a lot of things. It depends what you've been through in your life, and whether you've had that foundational upbringing with love and nurture and validation, and things of those things are very, very important. If safety, security, right? 4th house, Cancer, Moon. If you haven't had, and Taurus as well, Taurus 2nd house, security, validation, self-worth. If those components of life haven't been integrated in a healthy way, then vulnerability is a daunting experience. The possibility of being vulnerable is not something that one would be comfortable in if they haven't had a solid foundation built underneath them. right, through their caregivers and so forth. So just back to that comment, he was saying that the realm of emotions is, it's just so overwhelming. And the way to combat that is to just stay in the head, in the mind, in the thoughts, right? Any principle in the 12th house can sustain us or undo us. Positive Saturn qualities such as recognizing their natural limits, the acceptance of duty and responsibility, and plain common sense may help them through difficult situations. Some exhibit a deep inner wisdom which can guide them through the most difficult times. However, too great a sense of separateness, so too much of being separate from the rest of life, an overly materialistic outlook, or a refusal to examine psychological problems could be the cause of pain and suffering. Sometimes there is a voluntary withdrawal from activity or a compelling need for privacy and seclusion to recollect the pieces of the self which have been shattered by a stressful encounter with life. Saturn in Pisces would definitely speak to isolation, whether that comes through from a voluntary or involuntary situation. It depends again on the person's soul circumstances, right? But I Saturn in Pisces, 12th house, that makes me think of somebody who there's many variations, but two very opposing manifestations could be going into deep depression. Depression is definitely Saturn and can be definitely part of the Pisces archetype as well, because of the sense of, well, if you think about Pisces, two fish swimming in opposite directions bound by a cord, it is reflecting the personality and the soul. The soul has the memory of something divine, something whole and beautiful, peaceful. And then the other fish swimming in the other direction is the attachment to the personality, egocentric structure, life. And they're bound by a cord. So there's this implication that we have to align the soul and the personality, because that sense of separateness, which is born out of being born into a physical body, is an illusion, which is Pisces as well. And that concept of aligning the soul personality is the underpinning of what esoteric astrology is about, the underpinning of esoteric astrology, aligning the soul with personality. And it also is a strong element or underpinning or body of work in evolutionary astrology as well. It's always about alignment, becoming conscious enough to bring ourselves back to alignment every time. It's not like we wake up and suddenly we're in total alignment and that's it, because then there'd be no point in being here. We have moments and experiences where we feel a greater sense of alignment at certain times because of certain choices we've made, certain work we've done in our life on ourselves and so forth. And then, life, as it does, will throw another lesson, another experience, and another thing will come up that will test us again. How much in alignment are we really when this lesson comes along? Okay, so where are we? Read that. Yep, read that. Yep, read that. Okay. At times, they may be driven to seek the support or aid of caring agencies or turn to something up there for help. As hard as this might be, a crisis which precipitates their asking others for help may enable them to discover that they are not alone in the world as they believed. So I guess that with that, he's basically saying, because there can be a tendency with Saturn in Pisces to feel isolated or to make yourself isolated through the depression, through the sadness, because there can be a lot of sadness with Pisces. The sadness comes through a lot because of the sense of disillusionment and disappointment that can occur from this 3D reality, which projects this belief that this is it, this is all there is. This is just one aspect of the game, and we are just playing the game to learn, to evolve. So he's saying that, you know, it's important to reach out, you know. One of my followers on YouTube, who is a lovely person, I won't say her name just in case she doesn't want me to, but I noticed she made a comment under the video I did with Ari, and it's a valid comment, and I can completely empathize and completely understand, and I know all of you will as well. She said that it makes me so sad that if you're not online and not socially active on social media, it's like everyone's kind of disconnected from each other. And the only way, or not the only way, but a large way that people seem to be connecting or maintaining contact is through online means. And I think that's very, very true. And it's probably amplified so much because of what's happened in the last 3 years with the narrative that played out the last 3 years. There's been tremendous separation and isolation that has occurred. Families torn apart, friends not speaking to each other anymore because of very different beliefs or perspectives on the narrative that played out in the last 3 years. It's devastating what's happened, actually. But I guess that's a big conversation, and there's many different ways of understanding that and exploring that, and I'm not going to do that today. But I guess, from a more philosophical and esoteric level, I'm more inclined to view the last 3 years and the separations that have occurred as kind of an advocate for, and this is a positive spin, an advocate for revealing to us, each of us, certain conditions, friendships, whatever it is, that we have outgrown. And it's always hard to separate and to say goodbye, whether it's ending a relationship or ending a job or ending a friendship or leaving a home and moving into another one. It's always a death and a new beginning. Those two are always there together, side by side. One cannot exist without the other. But the ending is the Pisces and the beginning is the Aries, hence why those signs are, adjacent to each other, representing the beginning of the wheel and the end of the wheel in the zodiac. One cannot exist without the other. But the ending is always hard, because there's always a sense of loss and death associated with an ending. Even if the ending, is inevitable, it has to happen, you have to accept it, whatever it is. You knew it was coming. It doesn't necessarily, knowing all of that doesn't take away the sadness or the sense of loss or disappointment that comes with those experiences, That's Pisces. And because Pisces can be, incredibly idealistic, and project fantasies, or project things that, ideals that cannot necessarily actualize or manifest in the way the Pisces dream or vision is projected, right? Because to get to that Pisces dream vision, we've got to go through the whole wheel. To go through the whole wheel, we've got to go through the development, the lessons, the growth, the challenges that every single archetype speaks to. Every archetype has a shadow, but it all comes back to Pisces. Everything ends up back in that 12th house, right? Okay. Just read that. So in conclusion, Saturn in the 12th asks that the whole realm of the unconscious be taken seriously. Those with this placement may be afraid to explore these waters, and yet this is precisely what they need to do. Should they overcome their fears and embark on the path of psychological self-investigation? I would add to that, he doesn't say this here, but I would add to that, embark on the path of well, Pisces is soul, you know. So I'm thinking that the journey, whilst it's, you know, very powerful to embark on the psychological implications or components of Saturn in Pisces, because there would be a lot of them there. It's also, you know, finding a way to connect to those deep waters, right? The mystic, you know, within. And, you know, Saturn is the teacher. He's a hard-ass teacher at that everyday consensus 3D plane. At that 3D plane, Saturn can be really cruel, extremely cruel. Now, this may be off topic, but I just want to give you an example. And yeah, it's a dark example, but it's a reality. When you see cruel behavior, I mean, somebody being really cruel, whether it's to a human or an animal, that's usually Saturn-Mars energy. I've seen it in so many charts of serial killers, for instance. Saturn-Mars. It's cruelty. It's that ability to be cruel with no empathy, no compassion, no moral compass, no sensitivity. So Saturn has that quality to it. It can go that way. So Saturn, you know, when Saturn is projected outside of us and onto everything around us, it kind of feels like it has us by the throat. It's suffocation. And actually Saturn in Pisces would be suffocation. So that can be symbolically or literally. And I'll give you a literal example. Just a week ago here, not even a week ago, just as Saturn went into Pisces, so maybe a week ago, a large part in Australia, and I wonder if this has happened in other parts of the world, I don't know. So if any of you know about this, you know, please let me know. I'd be very curious. A big part of Australia had this, had millions of fish suffocate. So and die. That's Saturn in Pisces. They were relating it to, I don't know, global warming or some natural earth thing or something. I don't know. I reckon they're just full of shit. But I don't know. It's pretty interesting though. You know, I mean, I was so sad about that when I heard that. Very sad. I mean, I wouldn't even kill an ant. I got a daddy long leg in my room at the moment. I don't really like spiders that much, but I've learned to accept them more in my older age, because I was terrified of them as a kid, because something was instilled within me to be terrified of. And I can't get the vacuum cleaner and just draw him in and kill him. I just can't do it. So I'm going to get a cup and put him in and take him out. But he seems quite happy there. So I'm also questioning, should I just leave him? It's a bit off topic, but it's an example of compassion. So getting back on track, in conclusion with how Sportis has been saying, is talking about psychological investigation. Then I was adding to that spiritual investigation as well. Our own relationship to spirit, our own understanding, our own commitment to that. These are all the themes that can be the potential gifts of Saturn in Pisces. It's a double-edged sword. It's very tricky because we can go into that field of applying in a very committed way towards our spiritual evolution and journey. And we can also fall into a deep depression, by depending on what we're identifying with as well. And then he says, they will not only reconnect to severed parts. So he's referring that to, if you do the deep psychological investigation, I add to that spiritual embodiment. He's suggesting that we will not only reconnect severed parts of our own unconscious, but regain a lost sense of relatedness to the rest of life in the process. So, the potential is beautiful in a lot of ways, and it does have some really difficult things about it as well. And I don't think anyone's going to have it just one way or another. Most of us will have a bit of a mixture of it, And then, of course, it also depends on, are you a day birth or are you a night birth? Because if you're a night birth, Saturn is your greater malefic relative to traditional astrology. And one of the biggest things with Saturn being the greater malefic, if you're a night birth, is the issue of definition, of not knowing how to define, and also not being able to clearly see when enough is enough. In other words, lack of boundaries. So take the person who is just giving and giving and giving and giving to a partner, relationship, whatever it is, and just not knowing when enough is enough, and when to, and how to create healthy boundaries. Something that we must remember, which is hard if you're a person who's got a lot of empathy and compassion and sensitivity, which is, they're all qualities of the three water signs actually, but the three water signs are very different in nature. But anyway, just somebody who's, generally very empathetic and sensitive, and sacrifices and so on and so forth, which of course is Pisces. This what I'm about to say is very, very challenging, and so you have to work at it more than the average person, so to speak, right? So by giving, even though your heart's in the right place, let's just say your heart is in the right place and it's coming from pure intention, pure, from the heart, no ulterior motive behind it. But with that, I would say, well, how pure is it? What's, are there hidden motivations? Because there's 85% of the unconscious operating in everything that we're doing. So how do we know that there's no ulterior motive at all? It's a tricky one, but let's just say that there isn't. Well, this constant giving that you may be giving to somebody who is disadvantaged in some kind of way, is deeply wounded, whatever it is, you've got to ask the question, by constantly giving, how is that helping that person grow and evolve? Because if you're taking away their opportunity to do something for themselves, even though it's hard, then you're taking away their ability to grow by giving. We've got to allow people to grow. in their own lessons. And sometimes that's very hard when it comes to somebody that we really love and we can see their struggle and their suffering. And all we want to do is rescue them, especially if we've got strong Pisces in our charts. Hello, Venus in Pisces. It's a hard lesson, a hard lesson. Okay, so there's just one other thing I wanted to quickly read as well. This is by Liz Green. She says, trying to hunt Saturn down through the mazes of the unconscious is difficult enough in the 8th house, where there are still some personality links. I'd have a question mark around that comment, but I'd like to read further. But the 12th is wholly for the soul. Yes, to that I completely agree. An analysis does not help understanding unless it is backed up by a knowledge of man's innately spiritual nature. The gold available from a 12th house Saturn is the power to serve, not to do good, in inverted commas, which is not service at all, she says, but to experience a sense of unity which the mystic is forever seeking, and the sense of responsibility and detached love which accompanies this unity. Now, the theme or concept of detached love is a big one, and it really actually does speak to even the comment I just made now about when somebody's, you know, constantly wanting to rescue somebody and help them, and, you know, the motivations come from a good place, you're interfering with that person's growth. And so that's where detached love would come in a very powerful way, because you can still deeply care and love somebody with the detached love approach, if you like. What would that look like? That would look like this. You see the person going through their struggles, whatever that is. You step in to offer some support, but then you step back to give that person the opportunity to work through things themselves as well, to learn and grow, to take some responsibility for what the soul is going through, what the soul is trying to remedy, correct, learn, develop, evolve. That's like a detached love. Aquarius is great at that, because Aquarius has the most natural capacity for detachment and is often accused of being non-loving because their love is a very detached love. Scorpio would be an all-consuming, obsessed love, which is a form of control. So when we reach Pisces, just see, did I finish what she was saying? But I just want to read that again. But to experience the sense of unity, which the mystic is forever seeking, and the sense of responsibility and detached love which accompanies this unity. That was relative to the gold available. There's gold there. And she's implying that the seeking must have this component to it, which can detach from everything, really. Because when we can detach, we can also disidentify. It's not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do, but it is part of what we are learning as souls and personalities on the planet. We are learning to love deeply. We are learning to let go. We are learning detachment. You know, we are learning all these things constantly. No one is a master at any of these things. I know Ari said yesterday that we don't repeat year 11 or year 12 because we master it and we move on. But I don't know if I agree with that, because some people do repeat year 10. Some people do repeat grade 5. I think he was just sort of speaking generally, you know, just trying to make a point of the journey of the soul as it learns and evolves through a lesson. It's mastered it, as it were, and so it moves on to the next. And so, yes, there is some truth in that for sure. But I suppose from a picture of the entirety of everything, which encapsulates the depths of our soul, there's so much there that we are constantly desiring to experience. And the desire is it's a deep unconscious impulse, desire, drive, compulsion towards something, because that's how the soul gets to evolve, to grow, to experience something. So the nature of Pluto is such that it, you know, it has such strong obsessive qualities about it, right? The compulsion to, the drive, you know, for this or that or this person, that experience. It makes sense when you think about it, because if you didn't have that desire nature, then you'd have no desire for anything. And so what the hell are you here for? Why would we be here if we had no desires? We all have those desires. So there's nothing inherently wrong with any desire, because it's part of the soul's desire to experience any given thing or situation. Let me just see if I've got anything here that I can just finish up with. I'm going to talk about getting hot now. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Yeah, okay. So just a comment on Pluto being the esoteric ruler of Pisces and the whole connection here of Saturn in Pisces, Pluto in Aquarius. Well, first of all, Pluto in esoteric astrology is corresponds to ray number 1. Ray number 1 is ruled by Pluto and Vulcan, is an incredibly powerful ray, probably the most powerful ray, actually, because it's the initiator of the will, the ultimate initiation of the will. So I feel like Saturn in Pisces being semi-sextile to Pluto in Aquarius brings in something about, well, first of all, Jeffrey says that the semi-sextile, in summary, brings something like this into our field. He says that there is a narrowing down to focus and stabilize. Because, okay, the reason he's saying that is because when there's a new phase conjunction, there's something new beginning, obviously, right? But there's very powerful instinctual energy behind that, right? Behind the new phase conjunction. So think about Saturn-Pluto conjunction back in 2019, 2020. Something new was born for each of us and collectively that was going to require a lot of hard work. And think about it, that's subsequently followed with the narrative that's been playing out the last 3 years, right? But from a personal take on it, when there's a new phase conjunction, it's, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, the conjunction is the most powerful aspect because of this reason. The conjunction contains everything. The 360 degrees circle, which is divided by 12, and then subsequently all the aspects are born out of that circle as well. The harmonics are born out of that, which are the aspects and so forth. One, which is the conjunction, number one, is the 360 degree circle. So therefore, a conjunction, when a conjunction is born between two planets, the possibilities are infinite and endless, because the possibilities are contained within that 360 degrees circle. In other words, a conjunction can manifest in numerous ways. We don't know exactly what's going to manifest. And the way we see the process is by following and tracking the conjunction between any two planets and their journey as they continue along through the zodiac. Because as they continue, they're going to form the semi-sextile, they're going to form a sextile, they're going to form a first quarter square, and there's numerous other aspects within that as well. Depends which ones you want to use. If you want to use just the main 8 ones that we typically use in the sun lunation cycle, from new moon to full moon back to new moon, there are 8 phases in there. We could just stick with those, or there are some more obscure aspects that we could pay attention to as well. So it just depends how deep you want to dive into that rabbit hole, so to speak, right? But in any case, the new phase conjunction between Saturn and Pluto has brought about what's happened in the last 3 years, and that's only the beginning. There's much more to come. So there's this unfoldment of these archetypes and the possibilities of things that they speak to moving forward. And just as they have separated in 3 years, they've almost 3 years, they've separated from the conjunction and gotten to a semi-sextile, which is Saturn in Pisces, Pluto in Aquarius. And so in this semi-sextile stage, Jeffrey's suggesting that there has to be a narrowing of the extent of focus, which I translate that to, because the conjunction speaks to infinite possibilities, really. And if we bring in the concept of the past, again, there's infinite sort of portals or themes or things that are coming from the past as well. So the semi-sextile starts to reduce that, starts to close it in a bit, so that the soul can focus a little bit more specifically, as opposed to having like a million ideas, just as a simple example, because it's preparing, right, for the first quarter square. Because the first quarter square, which occurs in 2029, is going to be, the first quarter square is crisis in action. So the matters that were born out of the conjunction in 2019, 2020, and the numerous possibilities around defining that and understanding that, get to a space where they need to be sort of more narrowed and focused for each of us individually, relative to what the Saturn-Pluto conjunction has meant for you and where it occurred in your birth chart, of course, right? Because this is in preparation to the first quarter square, where there will be a testing field. It's a first quarter square is really powerful, and it's going to blow things out of the water. It's going to be very intense when it comes up in 2029. But it will be the testing field of what is working and what isn't working relative to the actions of things you have been undertaking since the conjunction began, for instance. So you can see that when there is a conjunction of two planets, as that cycle continues, that the planets start to separate, and the speed of that and when the aspects will form is dependent on the planets in question, because each planet has a different speed. So with Saturn and Pluto, it's going to be a bit slower, as it would be with a Mars-Venus conjunction, right, for example. So, and yeah, and that's the thing. Saturn, Pluto, nothing happens quickly. It's the deepest, most difficult, most challenging work we will do at that deep soul level. And it takes a long time, but the reward is, and I'm not talking about reward from a personality ego level. I'm talking about deep soul reward is very profound if we can do the work that is being asked. So yeah, Pisces being ruled by Pluto esoterically, because Saturn is in Pisces at the moment, it's kind of like I think how I can word this. The very important work that we are concluding, finishing, because remember, Saturn in Pisces is finishing a 29-year cycle. Now, you may not be old enough to fit within that, so you need to think about that a bit differently, but most of you would be. So it is an ending, it is a culmination, it is a completion, finishing, clearing a lot of karmic shit out of your life. Lots of big things are happening here from that level. And because Pluto is the esoteric ruler to Pisces, there is an implication here that the work that we will do with Saturn in Pisces over the next 3 years has such powerful repercussions for our soul on an evolutionary level, because Pluto is the esoteric ruler of Pisces, just to put it very simply. So I'll leave you guys with those reflections. That was just a little bit more that I wanted to add to what was discussed yesterday. There's more. I still have more, so I may come back with that, I may not, I'll see. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you've stayed all the way through, thank you for that. And I'd love to hear your comments and all questions and perspectives. Always interested in engaging with you guys and hearing what you guys have to share as well. So I'll see you guys very soon with much more. Bye for now.